The moment Hyun-woo's consciousness merged with Jin-A's, reality became something entirely different. He existed simultaneously in his human body by the campfire and as a multi-dimensional being fighting creatures made of pure hunger in the spaces between worlds. The sensation should have driven him insane, but instead, he felt more complete than ever before. Through their shared awareness, he felt Jin-A's amazement at the human capacity for adaptation. Where other species would have been destroyed by the transition, Hyun-woo's mind simply accepted the new reality and began working with it. "It's working," he announced, though his voice seemed to come from multiple places at once. "I can see the battle from her perspective, and she can access my emotional stability." Around the sector, his classmates were undergoing similar transformations. Kira's merged consciousness with Bright Wing created a tactical awareness that spanned dimensions. Thex's combination with Stoneheart produced a determination that was unshakable across realities. Even Nyx managed to stabilize his energy form. By linking with his Void Stalker partner, the effect on the battle was immediate and dramatic. The Void Stalkers, strengthened by their human partner's emotional resilience, began pushing back the Devourers with renewed vigor. But more importantly, the merged consciousnesses were creating something the Devourers had never encountered before. They can't consume us, Hyun-woo realized with growing excitement. The emotional bonds are too complex. They don't know how to process friendship. Through Jin-A's cosmic awareness, he could see the Devourer's confusion. These creatures had evolved to consume pure energy and simple matter. The complex emotional connections between the humans and Void Stalkers created a type of energy that was completely foreign to them. "Professor," Kira's voice came through the communicator with scientific wonder, "we're generating a new type of quantum field. The emotional resonance between our species is creating energy patterns that actively repel the Devourers." Professor Velthar's readings from the Academy confirmed this incredible discovery. "The dimensional distortions around your positions are stabilizing. Whatever you're doing, it's having a measurable effect on local space-time." But the battle was far from over. More Devourers continued to push through the weakened barriers, drawn by the massive energy concentrations in the sector. The merged consciousness pairs were holding their own, but they couldn't seal the breaches alone. Through Jin-A, Hyun-woo felt a pulse of communication from other Void Stalkers across the galaxy. Word of the successful human alliance was spreading. Through their dimensional network, carried by the quantum effects of their emotional bonds. "More are coming," he announced with growing hope. "Void Stalkers from across the galaxy are responding to the call. They've never had allies before, but now." Space around the null sector began to shimmer as dozens, then hundreds of Void Stalkers phased into the area. These were beings who had withdrawn from contact with younger species after millennia of rejection and fear. But the proof that cooperation was possible had drawn them back to the fight. "Incredible," Professor Velthar breathed. "We're detecting over 300 Void Stalker signatures converging on your location. Some of them are traveling from star systems hundreds of light years away." The arriving Void Stalkers took up positions around the human students, seeking to form their own emotional connections. Du Young's voice crackled through Hyun-woo's personal communicator from the Academy monitoring station. "Hyun-woo, there are reports coming in from across the galaxy. Void Stalkers are appearing at research stations on colony worlds, even at the Galactic Council chambers. But they're not attacking. They're trying to communicate." Through his expanded awareness, Hyun-woo understood what was happening. The successful alliance in the Null sector had broken a barrier that had existed for millions of years. The Void. Stalkers were finally revealing themselves as the protectors they had always been, seeking to establish formal contact with the species they had guarded in secret. The Galactic Council is in emergency session, Du Young continued. They're receiving communications from Void Stalkers offering to share their knowledge about dimensional threats and protective technologies, but the immediate battle still demanded their attention. With hundreds of Void Stalkers now engaged against the Devourer incursion, the tide was finally turning. The creatures of pure hunger, faced with complex emotional energies they couldn't process and overwhelming numbers of opponents, began retreating toward the dimensional barriers. They're pulling back, Kira reported triumphantly. The Devourers are returning to dimensional space. Through Jin-A, Hyun-Woo felt the moment when the last Devourer withdrew from normal space. But instead of simply fleeing, the creatures were being guided, redirected by the Void Stalkers toward empty dimensions where they could feed on ambient energy without threatening inhabited worlds. They're not destroying the Devourers, he realized. They're finding them a place where they can exist without harming anyone. Even cosmic predators deserve to live, Jin-A's thoughts merged with his own. The goal was never extermination, but balance. As the immediate threat passed, the merged consciousnesses began to separate. Hyun-Woo felt himself returning fully to his human awareness, though he retained a permanent connection to Jin-A that would allow future communication. Around the sector, his classmates were undergoing similar transitions, their faces showing wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. Everyone, "Report status," Professor Velthar called urgently. "Conscious and coherent," Kira replied, though her voice carried a new depth that suggested her experience had changed her permanently. "Brightwing is... she's staying with me. As a partner, not a subject. Stoneheart has accepted a position as cultural liaison," Thex added with amazement. "He wants to help other Grathon understand what Void Stalkers really are." One by one, the students reported successful separations and ongoing partnerships with their Void Stalker companions. What had begun as a capture mission had become the foundation for a new type of interspecies cooperation. "Jin-A will be coming back to the academy with me," Hyun-Woo announced, feeling her joy through their permanent bond. "She wants to help establish formal diplomatic relations between our species." Professor Velthar's voice carried scientific excitement and personal pride. "Students, what you have accomplished today will change the course of galactic history. You've not only prevented a catastrophic invasion, but you've opened the door to alliance with one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful species." The transport ships began arriving to collect the teams, but the atmosphere was completely different from their departure. Instead of nervous students with untested theories, they were returning as the architects of a new age of cooperation. As Hyun-Woo packed his simple camping gear, Jinny settled beside him in a form that was becoming more familiar, still shifting and multidimensional, but somehow more approachable than before. "What happens now?" he asked her through their connection. Her response came as images of possibilities. Void Stalkers working openly with galactic species, sharing their knowledge of dimensional science and their protective capabilities. Humans serving as bridges between species, using their unique emotional resilience to facilitate connections that had seemed impossible. "The beginning," she replied, in concepts that translated to hope and joy and endless possibility. 3 months later, Hyun-woo stood before the Galactic Council as they formally welcomed the Void Stalkers as a member species. Jin-A was beside him, her form more stable now that she no longer carried the burden of fighting alone. The galaxy had learned that its greatest monsters were actually its most dedicated protectors, and humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or warriors, but as the species uniquely capable of building bridges between the impossible and the everyday. The final assignment had been to capture a rare creature. Instead, they had captured something far more valuable, the foundation for a friendship that would guard the galaxy for eons to come. Professor Velthar had been right about one thing. Successful completion of the assignment would guarantee positions at any research institution in the galaxy. But none of the students needed those positions anymore. They had become the first members of an entirely new profession, Interdimensional Diplomatic Corps, specializing in first contact with species that existed beyond normal reality. The universe had become a much more interesting place, and humanity was right at the center of making it work. As Hyun-woo looked out at the assembled representatives of dozens of species, all working together to build a better future, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best way to capture something dangerous was to offer it friendship instead, and sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could save everything. The first devourer broke through the dimensional barrier like a nightmare, tearing through reality itself. Hyun-woo felt Jin-A's shock through their connection as the creature materialized. It was far larger than any of them had expected, a writhing mass of hunger and void that seemed to consume light itself, just by existing. By all the stars, Professor Velthar's voice crackled through the communicator. It's the size of a battleship. But that was just the beginning. As the first devourer stabilized in normal space, more began pushing through the weakened barriers. The Academy's sensors went wild as readings spiked beyond their maximum ranges. "Multiple contacts!" came the panicked voice from the monitoring station. "At least 12 major entities, with more attempting to breach. The dimensional fabric is collapsing across the entire sector." Through his connection with Jin-A, Hyun-woo felt her people's alarm. The devourers were arriving in greater numbers than they had faced in centuries. Something had changed in the void between universes, driving them to desperate hunger. It's not just our equipment that drew them, he realized, sharing Jin-A's growing understanding. There's something else, something that's made them more aggressive. The answer came as a flood of cosmic awareness. The barriers between dimensions had been weakening across the entire galaxy due to the increased use of advanced technology by younger species. What had once been small tears that the Void Stalkers could easily seal had become massive ruptures. The more advanced we become, the more we weaken reality itself, Kira breathed, her voice filled with horror as her own companion shared similar knowledge. We've been making it easier for them to break through. The devourers had noticed. After eons of being held back by the Void Stalkers' vigilance, they sensed opportunity. The Null Sector wasn't just a random feeding ground, it was a test case. If they could establish a foothold here, they could use it as a staging ground for a full-scale invasion of inhabited space. All teams, prepare for immediate extraction, Professor Velthar ordered, as the Academy sensors registered more breaches opening across the sector. This is beyond our capabilities. No, Hyun-woo said firmly, feeling Jin-A's desperate determination through their bond. If we leave now, they'll break through completely. The entire sector will become a permanent breach point. Around him, the other Void Stalkers were gathering for what might be their final battle. Through Jin-A, he felt their grim resolve. They would fight until the end, even knowing they were outnumbered and facing odds worse than any they had encountered before. "Then we fight with them," Kira announced, her voice steadying as she made her decision. "Brightwing has been protecting the galaxy longer than our entire civilization has existed. I won't abandon her now." "Stoneheart says the same," Thex added. "He's asking me to stay strong while he phases into dimensional space. Something about needing an emotional anchor." One by one, the students committed to the desperate plan. Even knowing the risks, they couldn't abandon their newfound companions to face annihilation alone. "Students, I must strongly advise against this course of action," Professor Velthar warned. "You're not trained for combat situations of this magnitude." "We're not going to fight," Hyunwoo replied, his hand firmly connected to Jin-A as she prepared for the transition. "We're going to provide support. The Void Stalkers need stable emotional connections to maintain their coherence while battling in dimensional space." "It's never been attempted before," the professor protested. "Then it's time for a first," Hyunwoo said simply. The first wave of Void Stalkers began their phase transition, moving from normal space into the dimensional void where the Devourers were strongest. Through his connection with Jin-A, Hyunwoo felt the disorienting sensation of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. The battle began immediately. In dimensional space, the Devourers were revealed in their true form, not solid creatures, but living voids that consumed the very concept of existence itself. The Void Stalkers engaged them with weapons made of crystallized emotion and shields of pure will. "I can feel the battle," Kira reported with awe. "Through Brightwing's connection, it's like watching a war between abstract concepts." Hyunwoo focused all his attention on maintaining his emotional bond with Jin-A. He sent her feelings of calm determination, images of his small campfire, the taste of chocolate, the warmth of human friendship. In return, he felt her drawing strength from these simple, positive emotions. But the strain was enormous. Fighting in dimensional space while maintaining a connection to normal reality required incredible focus and energy. Through Jin-A, he felt her exhaustion growing as she battled creatures that could unmake her very existence. "They're weakening," he announced with growing worry. "The Devourers are too strong, and there are too many of them." The other students reported similar concerns. The Void Stalkers were fighting bravely, but they were being overwhelmed. For every Devourer they managed to push back, two more seemed to take its place. "There has to be something else we can do," Kira said desperately. "Some way to help them more directly." Through his connection, Hyunwoo felt Jin-A's sudden spike of hope. She had an idea, but it was dangerous beyond anything they had attempted so far. "She wants to try a deeper connection," he announced. "Not just emotional support, but actual consciousness sharing. If we can merge our awareness with theirs temporarily, we can give them access to human emotional resilience while they fight." "That's incredibly dangerous," Professor Velthar warned. "Consciousness sharing with alien species can cause permanent psychological damage." "But it might work," Hyunwoo replied, feeling Jin-A's urgent agreement. "Humans adapt to almost anything. Maybe we can adapt to existing in multiple dimensions long enough to tip the balance." "I'm willing to try," Kira announced. "Brightwing is hurt. I can feel her pain through our connection. If sharing my consciousness can help her fight better, then that's what we'll do." The other students quickly agreed. Even Nyx, whose energy-based form made the process more complex, committed to the attempt. "If this works," Professor Velthar said quietly, "you'll be making history. The first successful multidimensional consciousness sharing between species. And if it doesn't work? Thex asked. Then we'll probably cease to exist as coherent beings, the professor replied grimly. Hyunwoo looked around at his classmates, seeing their determination despite their fear. They had started this assignment as competitors trying to capture a dangerous creature. Now they were volunteers preparing to risk their sanity to save the galaxy alongside beings they had learned to consider friends. "Ready?" he asked. One by one, they confirmed their readiness. The Void Stalkers, sensing their human companions, resolve, prepared for the unprecedented merger of consciousness across dimensional barriers. Beginning consciousness-sharing protocol, Hyunwoo announced, pressing his connection with Jin-A deeper than ever before. Reality exploded around him, as his human awareness suddenly expanded to encompass multiple dimensions simultaneously. He felt Jin-A's surprise and joy as his emotional resilience merged with her cosmic perspective, creating something entirely new. For the first time in the battle, the Devourers encountered something they couldn't simply consume: the combined determination of species working together across the boundaries of space and time itself. The tide of battle was about to turn. As the dimensional barriers around the null sector began to crack under the pressure of the approaching Devourers, Hyunwoo found himself in deeper communication with Jin-A than he had ever imagined possible. The connection between them had grown stronger over the past hour, allowing him to understand not just her immediate thoughts and feelings, but glimpses of her long and lonely existence. "Tell me about your people," he said softly, placing his hand on what he had come to think of as her preferred contact point, a section of her form that remained consistently solid and warm. The answer came as a flood of memories and emotions that took his breath away. He saw the Void Stalkers as they truly were, an ancient species that had evolved in the spaces between dimensions, naturally empathic beings whose entire culture was based on emotional connection and shared experience. They had discovered the galaxy's inhabited worlds millions of years ago and had tried to make contact, but their appearance and the intensity of their emotional presence had terrified the younger species. Every attempt at communication had been met with violence and fear. "You've been trying to protect us all this time," Hyunwoo realized, feeling Jin-A's confirmation through their bond. But everyone was too afraid to understand. Through the communication network, he could hear his classmates having similar revelations with their own Void Stalker companions. The creatures were sharing their stories freely now, desperate to finally be understood after eons of isolation. "Mine is showing me star maps," Kira reported with awe. "Locations where Devourer incursions have been prevented. They've been guarding the galaxy for longer than recorded history. This one fought in the Battle of Zerion Prime," Thex added, his voice filled with respect. "That wasn't a random monster attack. It was a defensive action against Devourers trying to consume the planet's energy core." Professor Velthar's voice came through the communicator with the wonder of a scientist making the discovery of a lifetime. "Do you realize what this means? We've been completely wrong about one of the galaxy's most important species. The Void Stalkers aren't predators. They're guardians." Hyunwoo felt Jin-A's gratitude at finally being recognized for what she truly was. But mixed with that gratitude was a deep sadness, the grief of a species that had been misunderstood and feared for so long that many of her people had withdrawn completely from contact with other beings. "How many of you are left?" he asked gently. The answer came as emotional weight rather than numbers. Too few. Many had given up hope of ever. connecting with other species, and had retreated to the deepest parts of dimensional space. Others had been killed by the very beings they were trying to protect. "We need to change that," Hyunwoo said firmly. "When this is over, we'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Jin'e's form shimmered with hope, but it was tempered by urgency. Through their connection, she shared her knowledge of the approaching threat. The Devourers were not like any life form the galaxy had encountered before. They were entities of pure consumption, born in the void between universes and driven by an endless hunger for energy. They consumed not just matter, but the very fabric of space-time itself. "They're not evil," Hyunwoo realized as he processed the images Jin'e shared. "They're just hungry, like a force of nature. A very destructive force of nature," Professor Velthar observed grimly. "The Academy sensors are showing massive spatial distortions. Whatever's coming through is enormous." Through Jin'e, Hyunwoo learned about the eternal war that had been fought in the spaces between dimensions. The Void Stalkers had been holding the line against Devourer incursions for millions of years, preventing them from reaching inhabited space and consuming entire star systems. "Why now?" he asked. "Why are they breaking through here?" The answer chilled him. The Devourers had been drawn by the artificial energy signatures from the students' high-tech equipment. The concentrated technology in the null sector had created a beacon that pierced through the dimensional barriers, advertising the presence of a rich feeding ground. "Our equipment brought them here," Kira said with horrified understanding as her Void Stalker companion shared similar information. "We've put the entire sector at risk." "But we can fix it," Hyunwoo said, feeling Jin'e's agreement through their bond. "The Void Stalkers have a plan, but they need our help." The plan was complex and dangerous. The Void Stalkers would phase into the dimensional space where the Devourers existed, engaging them directly to prevent them from fully manifesting in normal reality. But fighting in dimensional space required enormous energy and focus, leaving them vulnerable. They needed stable emotional anchors in normal space, beings who could maintain calm connections with them while they fought, providing the psychological stability necessary to keep their forms coherent across multiple dimensions, simultaneously. "It's never been tried before," Hyunwoo explained to his classmates. "They've always had to fight alone, but if we can maintain our connections with them while they battle, we might be able to give them the strength they need to win." "What are the risks?" Professor Velthar asked. Jin'e's answer came as a mixture of uncertainty and determination. If the connections failed, the Void Stalkers could become lost between dimensions, unable to return to normal space. If the students couldn't maintain their calm during the battle, the feedback could cause psychological damage. "But if we don't try," Hyunwoo added, "the Devourers will break through and consume everything in this sector. Then they'll spread to inhabited systems." Around the sector, other students were reaching similar understandings with their companions. The Void Stalkers were sharing not just their knowledge, but their emotions, their hope, their determination, and their gratitude at finally having allies. "I'm in," Kira announced, her voice steady despite the fear underlying her words. "My companion, I think her name is something like Brightwing. She's been fighting alone for 3,000 years. I won't let her face this battle without support." "Mine calls himself Stoneheart," Thex added. "He's been carrying guilt for not being able to save a colony ship 50 years ago. I'm not abandoning him now." One by one, the students committed to the unprecedented alliance. Even Nyx, whose energy-based form made the connection more challenging, managed to establish a stable bond with his Void Stalker partner. As the dimensional barriers continued to weaken, Hyunwoo felt Jin-ae preparing for battle. Her form became more focused, more purposeful, as she gathered energy for the transition to dimensional space. "There's something else," he said suddenly, a new understanding coming through their connection. "The chocolate, the tea, the simple, human things that made the connection possible, that's important somehow." Jin-ae's confirmation came with images of the devourers recoiling from certain types of energy. The artificial power sources attracted them, but organic, emotionally charged energy confused and repelled them. Human emotions, Hyunwoo realized. Our capacity for hope and friendship and simple pleasures, it's like a shield against them. They can't process positive emotional energy. That's why they've avoided inhabited worlds with strong cultural connections, Professor Velthar said with growing excitement. The devourers can only consume pure energy. Complex emotional resonance is toxic to them. Through the communication network, Hyunwoo could hear the wonder in his classmates' voices as they grasped the implications. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their physical capabilities. It was their ability to form emotional bonds with virtually anything, even cosmic entities that terrified every other species in the galaxy. "We're going to win this," he said to Jin-ae, feeling her fierce joy through their connection. "Together!" The dimensional barriers finally cracked completely, and reality shimmered as massive forms began to press through from the void between universes. The battle for the null sector was about to begin, and it would be fought not with weapons or technology, but with the simple power of friendship and trust. The Void Stalker beside Hyunwoo was clearly agitated, its form rippling with patterns of light that pulsed in urgent rhythms. Through their connection, Hyunwoo felt waves of warning and concern that had nothing to do with the human students, scattered across the null sector. "Something's wrong," he reported into his communicator. "My companion is trying to warn us about something else, something worse." "Your companion?" Kira's voice carried a note of disbelief even through her fear. "Hyunwoo, you can't seriously think you've tamed that thing?" But that's exactly what appeared to have happened. The massive creature that had terrified entire space fleets was now sitting beside a human campfire, accepting chocolate and sharing emotional connections like a cosmic version of a friendly dog. Through the communication network, Hyunwoo could hear the chaos erupting at the other team positions. The Void Stalkers surrounding them weren't attacking, but their presence was causing panic among the students. "They keep trying to herd us toward the center of the sector," Thex reported, his voice strained. "Every time we try to move toward the perimeter, they block our path." "Same here," Nyx added. "It's like they're trying to protect us from something outside the area." Hyunwoo's companion suddenly stood and moved to the edge of the firelight, looking out into the darkness beyond. Its form had become more solid, more focused, as if it was preparing for something. "What is it?" Hyunwoo asked, both aloud and through their emotional connection. The response came as a flood of images and feelings. He saw things moving in the deep spaces between dimensions, creatures that were not like the Void Stalkers at all. Where the Void Stalkers were lonely and seeking connection, these other things were hungry in a way that meant only destruction. "Devourers," he whispered, the word coming to him through the connection. "There are things called devourers coming." "Professor." Velthar's voice crackled through the communicator with new urgency. "Did you say devourers?" Hyunwoo, that's just a legend. Ancient stories about creatures that consume dimensional energy. They're not legends, Hyunwoo replied, standing up as his companion began to pace anxiously. The Void Stalkers have been trying to protect the galaxy from them. That's why they appear during crises. They're trying to warn people or drive them away from danger. The creature beside him made that musical humming sound again, but this time it was joined by other voices. The Void Stalkers around the other team positions were calling to each other across the sector, sharing information in their own dimensional language. The Academy monitoring station is detecting massive energy fluctuations at the sector boundary, Professor Velthar reported. Something large is trying to break through into normal space. Through his connection with the Void Stalker, Hyunwoo felt a decision being made, not just by his companion, but by all the creatures in the sector. They were going to make a stand here, try to prevent whatever was coming from reaching inhabited space. The Void Stalkers are going to fight, he announced, but they need our help. Our help? Kira's voice was incredulous. We're students with research equipment. What could we possibly do against legendary space monsters? More than you think, Hyunwoo replied, his confidence growing as he understood more through his connection. The Devourers feed on artificial energy. All your high-tech equipment makes you targets, but they can't process natural biological energy or simple emotional connections. His companion moved back to him and gently touched his hand again. This time, the contact brought not just emotions, but something like actual thoughts, complex ideas translated into feelings he could understand. They want to know if humans will help, Hyunwoo said in amazement. Not just me, all humans. They've been watching our species since we joined the galactic community. They think we have something special. What could we possibly have that other species don't? Thex asked, though his voice carried less skepticism than before. We stay calm when we should be terrified, Hyunwoo realized. We make friends with things that want to kill us. We find solutions that don't involve fighting when everyone else reaches for weapons. The Void Stalker beside him made an approving sound and moved closer to the fire. Other creatures began to materialize around the campsite, not threatening, but gathering like a pack preparing for battle. Hyunwoo, Du Young's voice came through his personal communicator. The Academy is detecting at least a dozen major entities trying to break into normal space. Whatever's coming, it's big. Then we'd better get ready, Hyunwoo replied. He looked at his companion and felt a surge of determination through their connection. What do you need me to do? The answer came as a complex mix of images and emotions. The Void Stalkers could fight the Devourers in dimensional space, but they needed anchors in normal reality, calm, stable minds that could help them maintain their form while battling creatures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They need emotional anchors, Hyunwoo announced to his classmates. People who can stay calm and provide stable emotional connections while they fight. That's insane, someone protested. We'd be defenseless. No. Professor Velthar's voice came, thoughtfully through the communicator. It's brilliant. Hyunwoo, are you certain this will work? As certain as I can be, Hyunwoo replied, though his heart was racing. But everyone needs to shut down their advanced equipment. The Devourers are drawn to artificial energy sources. One by one, his classmates began to acknowledge the plan. Kira's team powered down their quantum nets. Thex's group secured their plasma cannons. Even Nyx and his energy-based teammates reduced their artificial enhancements to minimum levels. This goes against everything we've learned about dealing with dangerous creatures, Kira muttered, but she was already following instructions. Maybe, That's the point, Hyun-woo replied gently. Maybe humans are good at this because we don't follow the standard approaches. The void stalker beside him settled back into a comfortable position, its form becoming more relaxed as it felt his growing confidence. Other creatures were positioning themselves around the human positions, creating a defensive network across the sector. I can't believe I'm saying this, Thex announced. But I'm shutting down all weapon systems and relying on an interdimensional monster to protect me. Not a monster, Hyun-woo corrected gently. A friend. As if responding to his words, his companion reached out and touched his hand again. This time, the connection brought something new, a name, or at least the closest thing to a name that a dimensional being could have. Jin-ae, he said softly, trying to pronounce the concept he'd received. Your name is Jin-ae. The creature's form shimmered with what was unmistakably pleasure at being recognized as an individual rather than just another member of her species. Jin-ae, he repeated, and felt her joy through their connection. Around the sector, other students were beginning to make their own tentative contacts with the Void Stalkers positioned near them. Some were more successful than others, but even the basic acknowledgement that these were individuals rather than threats was changing everything. Contact established, Kira reported with wonder in her voice. I think mine is trying to tell me something. Same here, Thex added. This is the strangest thing I've ever experienced, but I'm not afraid anymore. The energy readings from the sector boundary spiked dramatically, and reality itself seemed to shiver as something massive began forcing its way through the dimensional barriers. Here they come, Professor Velthar announced grimly. Ginny stood and looked toward the approaching threat, her form becoming focused and ready. Through their connection, Hyun-woo felt her determination and her gratitude. For the first time in eons, she wouldn't have to fight alone. The real battle was about to begin, and it would be won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple power of connection and trust between different species. Humanity was about to prove that sometimes the most unlikely friendships could save the galaxy. The Void Stalker stood perfectly still in the firelight, its form shifting between solid matter and pure shadow. Up close, Hyun-woo could see details that no previous report had mentioned. The creature's skin seemed to contain tiny stars, and its multiple eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and curious. Most importantly, it wasn't attacking. Through the communication network, Hyun-woo could hear his classmates' reactions from their distant positions. By the void, Thex whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. It's massive. Hyun-woo, that thing could tear you apart without even trying. The energy readings are incredible, Kira reported, her scientific training overriding her fear. It's not just phasing between dimensions, it's existing in multiple realities simultaneously. How is this possible? Professor Velthar's voice cut through the chatter. Hyun-woo, what is the creature doing? Report your status immediately. Hyun-woo took a slow sip of his tea, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. It's observing me, Professor, the same way I'm observing it. The Void Stalker tilted its head at an angle that defied normal anatomy. The gesture reminded Hyun-woo of a curious cat trying to understand something new. He almost smiled at the comparison. I'm going to try something, he said quietly into his communicator. Negative, Professor Velthar responded immediately. Do not engage. Maintain your current position and wait for extraction. But Hyun-woo was already moving. Slowly, carefully, He reached into his supply crate and pulled out a chocolate bar. The creature's eyes followed his movement with intense focus. "What are you doing?" Du Young's voice came through his personal communicator, tight with worry. "Testing a theory," Hyun-woo replied softly. He unwrapped the chocolate bar with deliberate slowness, making no sudden movements. The Void Stalker watched every action with what appeared to be fascination. When the sweet smell of chocolate reached the air, something changed in the creature's posture. It leaned forward slightly, its form becoming more solid. Hyun-woo broke off a small piece of chocolate and placed it on the ground between himself and the creature, then sat back to wait. The communication channels erupted with protests. "Have you lost your mind?" Kira shouted. "That's one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy." "It's going to kill him," another student moaned. "All teams prepare for emergency extraction," Professor Velthar ordered. "If that creature makes any aggressive move—" "Wait," Hyun-woo said firmly. "Please just wait." The Void Stalker approached the chocolate with cautious steps. Its movement was graceful, almost dance-like, as if it was trying not to frighten him. It stopped just outside the circle of firelight and extended what might have been a tentacle or arm toward the small offering. When it touched the chocolate, the creature's entire form shimmered with what looked like surprise. It lifted the piece and examined it from multiple angles before placing it somewhere within its shifting anatomy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature made a sound that was unlike anything in the galactic databases. A low, musical humming that seemed to come from multiple dimensions at once. Did it just purr?" Du Young asked in amazement. The Void Stalker settled into a more relaxed position, folding its impossible form into something almost comfortable-looking. It was still watching Hyun-woo, but the intensity had changed. Where before there had been wariness, now there seemed to be curiosity and something that might have been gratitude. "Incredible," Professor Velthar breathed through the communicator. "In 300 years of recorded encounters, no one has ever reported a Void Stalker displaying non-aggressive behavior." Hyun-woo slowly reached for another piece of chocolate, moving with the same careful deliberation. This time, instead of placing it on the ground, he held it out in his open palm. "Hyun-woo, no," Kira warned. "You're taking too big a risk." But the creature approached even more slowly than before, extending what was definitely an appendage of some kind. When it touched Hyun-woo's hand to take the chocolate, he felt a shock that had nothing to do with electricity. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories, but something else. He saw vast spaces between stars, felt loneliness that stretched across eons, and experienced a desperate hunger that had nothing to do with food. The creature pulled back quickly, as if the contact had been as surprising to it as it was to Hyun-woo. "What happened?" Du Young asked urgently. "Your biosigns just spiked." I think it communicated with me," Hyun-woo said in wonder. "Through touch, I felt what it was feeling." The Void Stalker made the humming sound again, softer this time. It seemed to be considering something. Then, very carefully, it extended its appendage again, not toward the chocolate, but toward Hyun-woo himself. "Don't let it touch you again," Professor Velthar warned. "Unknown alien contact could be dangerous." But Hyun-woo was already reaching out. When their hands, or hand and appendage, met again, the connection was stronger. This time, he was prepared for it. The creature's loneliness washed over him like a tide. He saw flashes of its existence, drifting through the spaces between dimensions, drawn to the emotions of other beings but feared and attacked whenever it tried to make contact. It wasn't a predator, it was just profoundly, terribly alone, and hungry, but not for flesh or energy. It was hungry for connection, for understanding, for the emotional warmth that other beings shared with each other. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but when it broke, both human and void stalker seemed changed by it. "What did you learn?" Professor Velthar asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. Hyunwoo looked at the creature, who was watching him with what he now recognized as hope. "They're not predators," he said quietly. "They're empaths. They feed on emotions, but not by destroying them. They just want to share them, to connect." "That's impossible," Kira protested. The reports show beings who were terrified and attacked anything that frightened them," Hyunwoo interrupted gently. "What would you do if you were desperately lonely, and every time you tried to meet someone, they screamed and tried to hurt you?" A long silence fell over the communication network as his classmates considered this. Meanwhile, the Void Stalker had moved closer to the fire. It seemed fascinated by the flames, extending parts of its form toward the warmth. When Hyunwoo offered it more chocolate, it accepted with what was clearly becoming trust. "This is unprecedented," Professor Velthar said finally. "Hyunwoo, you may have just revolutionized our understanding of one of the galaxy's most feared species." But their moment of peaceful contact was interrupted by alarms from the other team's positions. "Multiple contacts," Thex shouted through the communicator. "We've got at least 6 Void Stalkers materializing around our perimeter." "Same here," Kira reported, her voice tight with renewed fear. "They're surrounding our position. I think they're coordinating." The creature beside Hyunwoo suddenly stood, its form becoming more alert and focused. It looked toward the distant positions where the other teams were stationed, and Hyunwoo felt a pulse of concern through their connection. "They're not attacking your teams," he realized. "They're trying to protect them." "Protect them from what?" Professor Velthar asked sharply. Before Hyunwoo could answer, his new companion made a sound he hadn't heard before, a warning call that seemed to vibrate through multiple dimensions at once. Something else was coming to the Null sector. Something that even Void Stalkers feared. The real danger was about to reveal itself. Night fell across the Null sector like a curtain made of shadows and starlight. The strange physics of the region made the darkness feel alive, shifting and moving in ways that normal space never did. Hyunwoo sat by his small campfire, watching. The flames dance in patterns that seemed to respond to the dimensional instability around them. Through his communication device, he could hear the chatter from the other teams as they completed their preparations. Their voices carried excitement, nervousness, and determination in equal measure. "Kira's team, this is base station," came Professor Velthar's voice through the communication network. "Your quantum net array is showing optimal readings. All systems appear ready." "Confirmed, Professor," Kira's crisp voice replied. "We have full dimensional coverage across our target zone. If a Void Stalker phases within 3 kilometers of our position, we'll detect it immediately." Hyunwoo could picture her team's setup from the briefings they had all attended. Their base looked like a small fortress, bristling with sensors and energy weapons. Force field generators created overlapping barriers that could theoretically contain even a phasing creature. "Thex's team. Report status," the professor continued. "All weapon systems operational," came Thex's rumbling voice. Plasma cannons charged and locked on predetermined firing zones. If anything materializes in our area, we'll hit it with enough firepower to stun a space whale. The other teams reported in one by one. Nix's energy-based group had created something that existed partially in 7 different dimensions simultaneously. Another team of crystal-based life forms had grown living, barriers that could supposedly adapt to any threat in real time. Hyunwoo's team, Professor Velthar called. There was a slight pause. Report your status. Hyunwoo looked around his simple campsite. He had a small tent, a campfire, and his supply crate arranged neatly nearby. Camp established, Professor. All systems functional. He heard a few chuckles from the other communication channels. To them, his setup must seem like a joke compared to their sophisticated preparations. Remember, all teams... Professor Velthar's voice became serious. Void stalkers are unpredictable. They may appear anywhere in the sector, or they may not appear at all. Maintain vigilance, but do not take unnecessary risks. As the night deepened, Hyunwoo opened his supply crate and began preparing tea using a small camping stove. The familiar ritual helped calm his nerves. Back on Earth, his grandmother had always said that tea could solve any problem if you gave it enough time and patience. The communication channels gradually grew quieter as teams settled in for their watch. Hyunwoo could see the glow of their various installations in the distance, bright spots of artificial light scattered across the dark landscape. His own fire was much smaller, casting a gentle orange glow in a small circle around his camp. He had chosen this spot carefully after studying the reports. Void stalkers seemed to avoid areas with too much artificial energy, but they were drawn to places where emotions ran high. Du Young's voice crackled through his personal communicator. "How are you feeling out there?" "Nervous," Hyunwoo admitted, quietly. "But determined. The dimensional distortions are stronger than I expected. I can actually feel them in the air." "That's normal for the null sector," Du Young replied. "The Academy monitoring station is tracking some unusual energy patterns, but nothing that suggests immediate danger." "How's your emotional state?" It was a strange question, but Hyunwoo understood why Du Young was asking. If his theory was correct, his own emotions might influence whether a void stalker appeared. "I'm trying to stay calm," he said. "Not scared, just, open to whatever happens." "Perfect. Remember, you're not trying to capture anything tonight. You're just observing and learning." Around midnight, the first sighting occurred. Kira's team detected a dimensional disturbance at the edge of their sensor range. The communication channels exploded with activity. "Contact! We have contact!" Kira's voice was tight with excitement. "Large entity phasing in and out of normal space, approximately 2 kilometers northeast of our position." "All teams maintain position," Professor Velthar ordered. "Do not engage unless directly threatened. This is still a research mission." Hyunwoo stood up, looking in the direction of Kira's position. He couldn't see anything from his distance, but he could feel something change in the air around him. The dimensional distortions seemed to pulse with a strange rhythm. "It's moving," Kira reported. "Heading toward Thex's position. Speed increasing." "We see it." Thex's voice boomed through. The communicator. Massive shadow, at least 8 meters long. Multiple eyes, just like the reports described. It's terrifying. "Steady, Thex." The professor's voice remained calm. "Observe and record. Do not engage unless it directly threatens your team." But even from his distant position, Hyun-woo could hear the fear creeping into his classmates' voices. As the creature moved between their positions, panic began to spread through the communication network. "It's not following any logical pattern," Nix reported, his energy form flickering with agitation. "It appears, vanishes, then reappears somewhere completely different. I can't track its dimensional signature." "Weapons locked on," Thex announced. "If it comes any closer, do not fire unless directly attacked," Professor Velthar commanded firmly. "Remember, our goal is live capture, not destruction." Hyun-woo listened to the growing chaos with growing understanding. The creature was appearing near each fortified position in turn, but it wasn't attacking, it was investigating. And the more frightened his classmates became, the more active the creature seemed to grow. "It's feeding on their fear," he whispered to himself. As if summoned by his words, something changed in the air around his own campsite. The dimensional distortions intensified, and the temperature dropped several degrees. The flames of his campfire flickered but didn't go out. Through his personal communicator, Du Young's voice came urgently. "Hyun-woo, we're detecting a massive energy signature forming right on top of your position. Something big is about to manifest." Hyun-woo's heart began to race, but he forced himself to remain seated by the fire. "I know," he said quietly. "I can feel it." The space above his campfire began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But instead of heat, this distortion brought cold and the sensation of vast emptiness. "Hyun-woo, get out of there!" Kira's voice shouted through the main communication channel. "We're reading energy levels off the charts at your position." "Recommend immediate extraction," Thex added. "That signature is larger than anything we've detected tonight." But Hyun-woo remained perfectly still, his teacup warm in his hands. He watched as the dimensional distortion grew stronger, feeling a presence pressing against the boundaries of normal space. "Hyun-woo, respond!" Professor Velthar's voice carried genuine worry. "What is your status?" "I'm fine," Hyun-woo said, calmly, though his voice trembled slightly. "Just waiting." The distortion reached a peak, and reality seemed to tear open like fabric. Through the gap stepped something that should not have existed in their dimension, a creature of living shadow and starlight, with eyes like distant galaxies and a form that shifted between states of matter. The Void Stalker had arrived. It was larger than any of the previous sightings, more solid, more real. As it fully materialized in the firelight, Hyun-woo could see that it was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. The creature stood motionless for a moment, as if surprised, to find someone sitting calmly by a fire instead of running in terror. Its multiple eyes focused on the human, and Hyun-woo felt a pressure in his mind like the whisper of alien thoughts. "Contact confirmed," he said quietly into his communicator. "Beginning observation phase. What happened next would change everything." They thought they knew about Void Stalkers, and about the power of remaining calm in the face of the impossible. 3 weeks passed quickly at the academy. While other students worked day and night on their elaborate capture devices, Hyun-woo spent his time in the library archives, reading every report he could find about Void Stalker encounters. The more he read, the more convinced he became that everyone was approaching this problem wrong. Du Young helped whenever he could, using his psychology background to analyze the behavior patterns they found in the old reports. They worked together, in their small dorm room, spreading papers and data tablets across both their desks. "Look at this one," Du Young said, pointing to a report on his screen. A Void Stalker appeared on a passenger ship during an engine failure. The passengers were terrified, sure they were going to die. But according to this witness statement, the creature didn't attack anyone. It just moved among them. Like it was drawn to their fear, Hyun-woo agreed. But not to hurt them. More like it was curious about their emotions. They had found 17 similar cases. In each one, the Voidstalker appeared during moments of intense fear or sadness, but the actual harm done was minimal. Most of the injuries reported were from people panicking and hurting themselves while trying to escape. The really interesting thing, Do-young continued, is what happens when people stay calm. There are 3 reports where individuals didn't run or fight, and in all 3 cases the creature left them alone completely. Hyun-woo made notes on his tablet. So maybe they're not aggressive at all. Maybe they're just misunderstood. Meanwhile, their classmates were making impressive progress on their high-tech solutions. Kira's team had designed quantum nets that could theoretically trap a phasing creature. They had consulted with military engineers and spent their entire project budget on advanced materials. Thex's group had taken a more direct approach. They planned to use overwhelming firepower to stun a Voidstalker long enough to contain it in a specially designed energy cage. Their equipment list read like a military arsenal. Nyx had formed a team with other energy-based species. Their strategy involved matching the creature's dimensional phasing abilities and engaging it on multiple reality levels simultaneously. All of their approaches assumed the same thing, that Voidstalkers were dangerous predators that needed to be overcome through superior technology or force. Hyun-woo's preparation looked pathetic by comparison. He had requisitioned basic camping equipment, a simple dimensional beacon to call for help if needed, and strangest of all, a collection of comfort foods from Earth. When his classmates saw him packing chocolate bars and tea bags, they laughed openly. Planning a picnic with the monster? One of Thex's teammates joked. Maybe he thinks he can feed it to death, another added. Hyun-woo ignored their comments, but he felt embarrassed. His supplies did look silly next to their advanced technology. Still, something deep inside told him he was on the right track. Do-young supported his unusual approach. In psychology, we learn that connecting with another being often starts with understanding their basic needs. If these creatures are drawn to emotions, maybe they need emotional connection rather than conflict. But what if I'm wrong? Hyun-woo asked during one of their late-night planning sessions. What if they really are dangerous predators and I'm just walking into a death trap? Then you call for help with your beacon and get out of there, Do-young replied practically. But what if you're right? What if you succeed where everyone else fails because you're the only one trying to understand instead of destroy? The night before departure, Hyun-woo lay awake, thinking about what he was about to attempt. The null sector, where Voidstalkers had been spotted, was a dangerous region of space where the barriers between dimensions were thin. Reality itself was unstable there. He thought about his family back on Earth. His parents had been so proud when he was accepted to the academy. Humans were still proving themselves worthy of galactic citizenship, and every human student carried the weight of their species' reputation. What would they think if they knew he was planning to approach one of the galaxy's most feared creatures with nothing but camping gear and snacks? The next morning, transport ships arrived to take the student teams to the null sector. As they loaded their equipment, the differences between approaches became even more obvious. Kira's team needed 3 cargo containers for their quantum nets and monitoring equipment. Thex's group loaded plasma cannons and reinforced bunkers. Nyx's team brought devices that hurt to look at directly, existing partially in dimensions human eyes couldn't process. Hyun-woo carried a single backpack and a small supply crate. Professor Velthar walked among the students, inspecting their preparations. He spent long minutes examining the technical specifications of the various high-tech solutions, nodding approvingly at the complexity and innovation displayed. When he reached Hyunwoo, he paused. "Is this all your equipment, Mr. Hyunwoo?" "Yes." "Professor," Hyunwoo replied, trying to sound confident. "I see." The professor's 4 eyes studied him carefully. "And your strategy?" "I plan to observe and understand the creature's behavior patterns before attempting any kind of contact," Hyunwoo explained. "Most previous encounters have been chaotic. I want to create a calm environment and see how the creature responds." Foralko. Nearby students snickered. Professor Velthar raised a scaled hand for silence. "An interesting approach," he said neutrally. "Unconventional, but interesting. I hope you have thoroughly considered the risks." "I have, Professor. I'll maintain communication with the monitoring station and call for extraction if the situation becomes dangerous." During the flight to the Null sector, Hyunwoo sat alone while the other teams made final adjustments to their plans. Through the viewport, he could see the strange, shifting colors of the dimensional boundary region approaching. Du Young had given him a communication device so they could stay in touch despite the distance. It crackled to life as they neared their destination. "Remember," Du Young's voice came through the static, "you're not trying to prove how brave or strong humans are. You're trying to prove how smart and understanding we can be. That's just as valuable." "Thanks," Hyunwoo replied quietly. "I hope you're right." The transport ship reached the deployment zone, a small planetoid where dimensional barriers were particularly weak. Each team would be dropped at a different location to avoid interfering with each other's attempts. As Hyunwoo prepared to disembark, he noticed that the other students were already suited up in protective gear and checking their weapon systems. He shouldered his simple backpack and picked up his supply crate. "Good luck, everyone," Professor Velthar announced over the ship's communication system. "Remember, this is a voluntary exercise. No grade is worth your life. If you feel you are in genuine danger, signal for immediate extraction." One by one, the teams were dropped off at their chosen sites. Hyunwoo watched through the viewport as they quickly established fortified positions with force fields, weapons arrays, and sophisticated monitoring equipment. Finally, it was his turn. The transport ship descended toward a quiet valley with a small stream running through it. The location looked peaceful, almost like some of the wilderness areas back on Earth. "Are you certain about this location?" the pilot asked. "It's quite exposed, no natural cover or defensive positions." "It's perfect," Hyunwoo said, though his heart was beating fast. "Thank you." As the ship flew away, leaving him alone in the strange landscape of the Null sector, Hyunwoo took a deep breath and began setting up his simple camp. He had no weapons, no force fields, no advanced technology. All he had was a theory, some basic supplies, and the hope that sometimes the simplest approach was the right one. As the sun set over the dimensional boundary region, painting the sky in colors that didn't exist in normal space, Hyunwoo lit a small campfire and waited to see if his understanding of void stalkers was correct. The real test was about to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Interspecies Academy as students from 12 different worlds hurried to their classes. In the advanced xenobiology hall, Professor Velthar adjusted his 4 eyes and cleared his throat with a sound like grinding metal. His blue-scaled body towered over the mixed group of students who sat in carefully arranged seats. Hyunwoo shifted in his chair, trying to make himself comfortable. Being the only human in the class made him stand out more than he liked. The other students were impressive in their own ways. Kira sat in the front row, her silver skin gleaming as she took perfect notes. The Zilani were known across the galaxy for their sharp minds and tactical skills. Behind her, Thex's massive form barely fit in his reinforced seat. The Grathon's natural armor plates clicked softly as he moved. Near the window, Nyx flickered between solid and energy form, a habit that still amazed Hyunwoo after months of classes. The quantum species could exist in multiple states at once, something that gave them unique advantages in many fields. Today, class, we begin your final assignment, Professor Velthar announced, his voice carrying easily across the room. This project will test everything you have learned about xenobiology, survival tactics, and field research. The students leaned forward with interest. Final assignments at the Academy were legendary for their difficulty. Some became stories told for generations. Your task, the professor continued, pulling up a holographic display, is to develop a comprehensive capture plan for one of the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. The hologram showed a shifting shadow with multiple glowing eyes. Even as a projection, it made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Void Stalker, Professor Velthar said with reverence. A creature so feared that even experienced hunters refused to track them. They exist between dimensions, phasing in and out of our reality at will. Their psychic abilities can drive sentient beings to madness within minutes of contact. Hyunwoo studied the image carefully. The creature looked terrifying, but something about it seemed almost sad. He shook his head, telling himself he was being silly. No one has ever successfully captured a Void Stalker alive, the professor went on. They appear without warning, cause panic and destruction, then vanish back into the Shadow Realm. Some scientists believe they feed on fear itself. Kira raised her hand. Professor, are we actually expected to capture one, or is this a theoretical exercise? Professor Velthar's expression was unreadable. That, Miss Kira, is for you to decide. Your assignment is to create a detailed capture plan. Whether you choose to implement it is entirely up to you. However, I will say that successful capture of a live specimen would guarantee the highest possible grade and likely a position at any research institution in the galaxy. Excited whispers filled the room. Several students were already pulling out their tablets to begin research. You have 1 month, the professor announced. You may work alone or in teams of up to 4 members. Remember, these creatures are extremely dangerous. Even studying them from a distance has driven researchers to madness. As the class ended, students immediately began forming groups. Kira was surrounded by eager teammates within seconds. Her reputation for strategic thinking made her the most sought-after partner. Thex and 2 other warrior-class students formed an obvious alliance, planning to use brute force tactics. Hyunwoo packed his things slowly, hoping someone might approach him. Humans were still new to galactic society, having only joined 20 years ago. Most species saw them as weak and primitive. Humans had no natural armor, no energy manipulation abilities, no psychic powers. They were considered the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. "Hyunwoo!" a familiar voice called out. He turned to see Du Young, his human roommate, approaching with a big smile. Du Young studied interspecies psychology and always seemed to understand. alien behavior better than most humans. How did your class go? Du Young asked as they walked toward the cafeteria together. We got our final assignment, Hyun-woo explained, telling him about the Void Stalker project. Du Young whistled softly. That sounds incredibly dangerous. What are you planning to do? I'm not sure yet. Everyone else is already forming teams. But, Hyun-woo shrugged. You know how it is. Their loss, Du Young said firmly. Humans might not have natural weapons or armor, but we have other advantages. We just have to figure out what they are. In the cafeteria, they sat at their usual table while alien students chatted excitedly about their team plans. Hyun-woo could hear fragments of conversation about military-grade equipment, psionic dampeners, and dimensional anchor technology. They're all approaching this like a battle, Do Young observed quietly. What if that's the wrong way to think about it? What do you mean? Hyun-woo asked. Well, you said the professor mentioned these creatures might feed on fear. What if they're not actually hunting for food or territory? What if they're responding to something else entirely? Hyun-woo considered this. The professor did say no one has ever captured one alive. Maybe everyone has been trying the same approach. Exactly, Du Young said, warming to the topic. In my psychology classes, we learn that behavior often has underlying causes that aren't obvious. What if everyone has been misunderstanding what these creatures actually want? That evening, Hyun-woo sat in his small dorm room, reading everything he could find about void stalkers. The reports were all similar: sudden appearances, terrified witnesses, destruction, then disappearance. But as he read more carefully, he began to notice patterns that others seemed to have missed. The creatures only appeared when people were already in distress. They showed up during disasters, battles, or moments of extreme fear. Every report described the same thing: beings in panic, and then the Void Stalker would materialize. Du Young, he called to his roommate, who was studying at his own desk. Look at this. Every single Void Stalker sighting happens when people are already scared or upset. Du Young came over to read the reports. You're right, that's strange. If they were just random predators, you'd expect more varied circumstances. What if they're not predators at all? Hyun-woo said slowly. What if there's something else entirely? The next morning, while his classmates were designing elaborate traps and weapon systems, Hyun-woo took a different approach. He went to the Academy's library and began researching not the creature's weaknesses, but its behavior patterns and the environments where it had been spotted. The librarian, an elderly Zephyrian with kind eyes, helped him access obscure reports that most students ignored. These older documents contained details that the official reports left out, small observations that previous researchers had dismissed as unimportant. One report mentioned that a Void Stalker had appeared during a mining accident, but instead of attacking the trapped miners, it had simply watched. Another described a creature that materialized during a space battle, but had focused on the areas where people were most frightened rather than where the fighting was heaviest. Interesting reading? Kira's voice made him look up. She stood nearby with her teammates, all carrying tablets full of technical specifications. Just doing some background research, Hyun-woo replied politely. We've been working on Quantum Net. Designs, she said with obvious pride. Thex's team is developing plasma cannon arrays. What's your approach going to be? Hyun-woo hesitated. His ideas seemed foolish compared to their high-tech solutions. I'm still researching. Kira's teammates exchanged glances. One of them, a tall reptilian student, shook his head slightly. Humans, he muttered, just loud enough for Hyunwoo to hear. They should stick to simpler assignments. After they left, Hyunwoo felt a familiar sting of disappointment. But then, he looked back at the reports spread across his table. Everyone else was preparing for war. Maybe that was exactly the wrong approach. He thought about what Do-young had said about underlying causes. What if the Void Stalkers weren't the monsters everyone believed them to be? What if they were something else entirely, and the fear and violence directed at them only made the situation worse? Hyunwoo made a decision that would change everything. Instead of building weapons or traps, he would try to understand. And if his theory was right, the simplest approach might be the most effective one of all.